So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Did you know that the Black community experiences abortion at a rate of 3 to 5 times higher than white women? Talk about racial profiling and targeting of Black women and their children. We'll be talking about this today, not only from the perspective here in the United States, but also my guest a little later on will be Obianuju Ekeocha, and she will talk about the targeting of Africa and how many people think that contraception is a great solution for a society where they believe gender inequality is occurring and real sexual abuse is occurring of women, but she actually really will help us understand that in reality, contraception isn't the answer. It contributes to the problem. And so we'll be talking about that a little later on with Obianuju. If you want to weigh in on the conversation today, the phone number is 1-888-914-9149. I would love to hear your thoughts and questions, but I want to talk to you first about this whole idea of being overwhelmed by social media. Have you become overwhelmed with the constant negativity of the news in social media? To be honest, I feel like 2 weeks in the quarantine, we probably should have disconnected it all. I think each of us would have been a heck of a lot happier if we created our own version in our homes of living off the grid and just ask someone, let me know when I'm allowed to go outside again, if I have to wear a mask. There's anywhere I shouldn't go, just let me know. I think it would have been a great solution and would have been the answer to so many of the mental health issues surrounding COVID-19. Disconnect from social media. Do the real social distancing. My priest keeps talking about how I'm not into social distancing. It's physical distancing, if you're going to call it anything. But I do actually think that we need some serious social distancing. Just look at the social media platforms. We're overwhelmed by the constant buzz and trends on Twitter with regard to everything from COVID-19, scary words such as pandemic, and riots and protests and looting. It's almost as if every single day there are 3 to 5 new things that are shocking and horrific that we hear about to create a lot of turmoil within each of us. Things that we end up dwelling on sometimes all day long and late into the night, keeping us up. So my challenge is, how do we sort through it all and decide what we actually need to know and worry about and what is just noise? Because I would argue most of what we're listening to and concerned about is actually noise. Now, if you have maybe some key tips for how you've disconnected, especially over the last couple of months, go ahead and give us a call or send us a note on social media. The number's 1-888-914-9149. You can connect to social media via relevantradio.com/trending to just pull up those social media links as well. So here are my quick tips to start shutting out the noise. And I'm not just saying in the time of COVID-19 or in the midst of all of the riots and prayer vigils and quote-unquote peaceful protests and so forth that we're experiencing. I'm talking about in general. I can tell you on a personal level, trying to cut down the noise has been something that I'm constantly striving to do. But there's some things that we have to work on. So I have 4 tips from you. And the 4th tip, I'm going to repeat both at the beginning and at the end. It requires some detachment. So here are the 3 things you can do while keeping detachment in mind. First, unfollow groups that upset you regularly. Now, you might wonder, well, what's the difference between thought-provoking and intriguing content that leads to perhaps interior dialogue and challenges you to rethink your position on things? Well, that's different from something that causes interior turmoil and a bad mood that affects everyone else you're surrounded by. So again, unfollow those groups that upset you regularly. Second, determine how much news you really need and what the right sources are for you. I'm not going to tell you who to follow to get your news. In fact, I'm not even going to tell you that you have to follow the news. I will give you this tip. Sometimes I think it's okay to disconnect from what's happening from a news and political standpoint, and instead gather your information from conversations, from the people you're surrounded by. Rather than just going to Twitter, why don't you ask a real friend or family member what they think? I'll never forget kind of growing up, and even to this day, I'll always ask my mom, what's going on with the gas prices? Why did they plummet? Why did they rise so much? And my mom usually has an incredible understanding of what's happening with the gas prices. That's very informative, something that she stayed on top of. And it may sound so silly, but seriously, unless you live in California and have to deal with exorbitant gas prices and gas taxes, I think that's been the one good thing about COVID-19. The gas tax was thrown out the door. I mean, honestly, I think people have been considering recalling Gavin Newsom because of this horrific gas tax. I really hope it doesn't come back. Anyways, I digress. Getting back to the point, that second tip is determine how much news you need and what the right sources are for you. This is really important because if we consume too much news throughout the day, it's also going to prevent us from just getting things done that we need to. We honestly only have so much brain power and mental energy and time in the day. And if we're reading that next article that someone has sent us or that we're researching online all throughout the day, it's distracting us not only from what we need to get done in terms of our responsibilities, but it's also distracting us from forming our hearts, our minds, our souls to be the person we were created to be. It's a distraction from what matters most about our life. The third thing is unfollow unnecessary people and unnecessary accounts in general. Now, that might be your old roommate from college who you love dearly. But if they're driving you crazy by watching their social media posts, delete them. If you really want to touch base, call them next week and see how they're doing. If it's really a priority to you, following them on Instagram doesn't show your priority. Reaching out to them in person shows their priority. You can always go back and refollow them, or you can always just check in now and again to see the latest photos from their family. I think sometimes we are so connected via social media, we actually don't even savor as much those connections we actually do have. I think it's an important thought. Now, second, it's okay to unfollow a family member if they really are stirring your heart to turmoil, rather than provoking you to really inquire and think about things from a really important perspective. I can tell you, some people have been sending me all these posts from old college friends and various people that we've known. And at a certain point, it's hard. I think a lot of people are shocked, and a lot of people do need to talk about what's been happening. But at a certain point, sometimes I say, you know what? I've actually stopped following these people for a reason. It's just too much for me to handle everyone's opinion on every topic. And there's a difference between silencing someone on social media so that you're not following them and allowing them to be heard when you're having a conversation with them, or maybe they're commenting on a post of yours. Now, under the same idea, that third tip of unfollowing unnecessary people and accounts, it's okay to unfollow your favorite weightlifting groups, foodie pages, or other fitness and exercise things that you might follow. Because here's the problem. Sometimes these people that we love, maybe even people who are just movie stars, at a certain point can really just rub us wrong day in and day out, to the point where they're just creating more frustration every time we see their post. So unfollow them. It's okay. You might miss your favorite recipes and the greatest new tips for exercising, or the best memes that you usually like, but what's going to be better for you? Which is why that fourth tip is what I mentioned first, and I'll mention again. We have to find a level of detachment. You see, if you're having a hard time going through this list and detaching and letting go of some of these accounts, from following some of these friends and family members, it shows that maybe there's some sort of disordered attachment that you and I really do need. And at a certain point, whether it's material goods that we just like seeing, photos that are fun, whatever it is, that's okay to pull back It's okay to have a withdrawal from something. And speaking of withdrawal, I want to challenge you to really take a second glance at this whole issue. We read about how when our Lord Jesus Christ in the Gospels was transfigured, it was Peter, James, and John who were there to witness his transfiguration. This is where Moses and Elijah appear, and God the Father, we hear his voice from heaven and the descending of the Holy Spirit upon Jesus Christ. And he's in dazzling white. It's a foretaste of his resurrection. And what's fascinating to me is that when Jesus and those three apostles, his inner circle, Peter, James, and John, came down from Mount Tabor, his apostles were having a difficult time casting a demon out of a young man. And one of the things that Jesus told them is that some demons can only be cast out with prayer and fasting. Now, I think that this is important for us to understand because each of us are battling our own sin, vices, temptations, and demons. And I'm not telling you that your social media connection is a demon per se, but what I am telling you is that the ways of this world and the devil who is prowling about like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour, that's from 1 Peter 5, our first pope, he should know he was heavily tempted to abandon Christ at the cross. This is the man who's telling us there is a demon. There is the evil one who's prowling the world, seeking to devour you. And if Jesus Christ is saying some demons can only be cast out with prayer and fasting, you and I can fill in that gap and really cause some detachment from social media with implementing a basic prayer life. By getting started with simple fasting. And now, don't overdo it. Know yourself. Don't say, hey, I'm going to do like a 3-day fast and you have a hard time fasting from ice cream after dinner, okay? Fast from one meal. Maybe you skip dinner and you don't eat anything after that noon lunch and you don't snack. You don't eat again until breakfast. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe you don't eat anything after that 6 p.m. dinner and you don't eat breakfast. And you make a rule that I cannot eat a single thing again between this evening and tomorrow at lunch at noon. Set a goal for yourself. Set yourself up for success and offer it up for a specific intention. Whether it's your detachment from social media, pornography, maybe it's for a friend. I remember when I first really got into fasting, it was right around the same time when a dear cousin of mine was getting married. And I thought, this is great. I can offer this fast for a purpose, for a person, for their marriage. And so there are benefits to orienting ourselves, to setting ourselves up for success, to filling in the gaps and that void of detaching from social media, and to offer these prayers for people and intentions that very dearly need it in the current culture. I don't know. Maybe instead of reading about what happened to George Floyd in the protests, maybe we can detach and fast for a day or a meal for him and his family who are in mourning. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. Joining me in just a little bit will be Obianuju Ekeocha. I'm so excited to talk with her about what's been happening in the culture there in Africa and what the influence of Western civilization is sweeping in with the United Nations Population Fund, Planned Parenthood Federation of America, and other groups, how that has impacted their livelihood and their day-to-day. And I have had this question for her because a number of people will often ask me, okay, I'm Catholic, I'm pro-life, I'm not okay with abortion, but don't you think contraception is like a good option to help in areas where there's gender inequality, sexual abuse of women, say, in a male-dominant society? And I always say, no. And I think my first reaction is that's naive of us to assume that contraception will solve the problems for that culture. And so Obianuju is going to help break that down and what the real solutions are and why contraception only contributes to the problem. Now, I'm looking at this image, and if you'd like to call in, weigh in on the conversation, give us a call at 1-888-914-9149. So you may or may not have seen the new Time cover for this week. The artist is a Titus Kaffar, and he is commenting on his George Floyd Time cover. And here's something that's interesting. We'll have to actually post a link out to this image. We'll get that posted on social media. It's an image of a Black mother holding her child up against her chest. Now, the child is whited out, and the child is a little baby. Now, what's interesting to me is you see clearly on the face of the mother that she's mourning. Now, as the artist reflects on this image, he says, quote, "I see the Black mothers who are unseen and rendered helpless in this fury against their babies." And I have to tell you, that was the breaking point for me where I said, you know what? Out of respect for George Floyd and his family, and the atrocities that have been done by people looking for attention and looking to virtue signal and looking to find any reason to riot and loot and just shout and show their aggression and frustration after COVID-19 or whatever else is going on in their lives, I finally said, you know what, we have to talk about abortion in relation to this issue, in relation to this whole race issue, because in reality, there's a lot that we're not saying. And again, out of respect for George Floyd and his mourning family, I haven't gone there. But I think that it's time to go there as this conversation continues. Again, he says, "I see the Black mothers who are unseen and rendered helpless in this fury against their babies." But here's the reality. What about the aborted babies who are targeted by Planned Parenthood and the greater abortion movement, not just in the United States, but worldwide? We're talking about Black babies. Did you know that 46% of the Black population has been aborted here in the United States since 1973? Nearly half of all Black babies are racially profiled and targeted in cooperation with Planned Parenthood. In fact, there was an undercover sting operation done some years ago that showed that to this day, if you wanted to call Planned Parenthood and specifically donate and ask to donate for a baby that is Black to be aborted, Planned Parenthood will gladly accept your donation today. You know why? Because the roots of Planned Parenthood are really, truly racist, and it's part of a greater eugenics movement, which we'll talk about what eugenics is in just a little bit. You have to understand that nearly 80% of Planned Parenthood abortion clinics are within walking distance of minority communities, Latino communities, Black communities. Now, 36% of all abortions here in the United States are actually performed on Black babies. So we're saying about 1 out of 3 abortions that are performed daily are on Black babies. Do you get what I'm saying? This does not make sense when Black people here in the United States are less than 13% of the general population. Planned Parenthood has an agenda. There is a reason that the United Nations Population Fund and Planned Parenthood Federation of America have focused so heavily on Africa. And it's tragic. We'll be talking about that in just a little bit with Obianuju Ekeocha joining us. You see, there's a real problem in the culture, and it's a problem with regard to the breakdown of the family within the Black community. And so as people keep talking about George Floyd and his family and racism, and I see this new Time cover of a mother mourning and holding her child, and they talk about the helpless mothers and their fury again, and the fury that's occurring against their babies, the participation of so many of our politicians who are funded by Planned Parenthood is racist. Yet these are the people who are out there virtue signaling right now about this entire issue. You see, we aren't willing to talk about what is incredibly uncomfortable and happening behind the scenes. We're not willing to talk about the fact that 3 out of 4 Black babies are born to single mothers with no dad in the picture. And those kids are then raised who have no father 5 times more likely to be poor and to commit crimes. And they're 9 times more likely to drop out of school. They're 20 times more likely to end up in jail. You see, what we're talking about, the real issue here, is the targeting of the Black community to kill their children and break down the family. This is the real problem that no one is talking about. And so, sure, Time magazine might have this great cover, but it's hypocritical because you can't put a baby and a mom on a magazine and not talk about the real issue at hand. This is why people like Dr. Alveda King, who's the niece of Martin Luther King Jr., talks about how the Black community has been incredibly targeted by Planned Parenthood and the abortion movement. And we need to do something about it. I think of Walter Hoy and the many other Black advocates who are saying, this is enough. We need to wake up. And you want to know who's been woke over the last year? Kanye West. You want to hear truth? Someone who sees that his community has been targeted, and this has increased the number of people jailed. This has increased the number of people who are born to fatherless homes. Abortion doesn't just impact the mother. It doesn't just kill the baby. It's destroying men. I know tons of people who are working in prison ministry, and you know some of the wounds that they are facing and working with these men in the prisons over the fact that they have experienced lost fatherhood. It was fascinating this year at the Walk for Life West Coast. One of the major things that they talked about was the fact that there were tons of prisoners locally who were walking in solidarity in the prisons with the Walk for Life there in San Francisco because they were men who had lost their fatherhood to this issue of abortion. You want to know how upsetting and angering that can be for a man when his own son or daughter has been aborted and legally in the United States he has no say? You see, the breakdown of the family is destroying individual human beings. It's destroying the love and responsibility that's fundamental to the human person, to our development, and to our ultimate happiness. This is the vocation that's written into our bodies. We are made for love. We are made to be in the image and likeness of God. And St. John Paul the Great in the Theology of the Body talks about how it's not just man, it's not just woman that images the image and likeness of God. It's both, and especially in complementarity. And those who choose to forego marriage, for example, become nuns or priests, they are offering up a great sacrifice that's written into the body, the natural vocation to marriage and family. You see, yet our culture, some of our political ideologies or cultural ideologies have specifically targeted the breakdown of the family. And it is so unfortunate the Black community is experiencing this in particular. Now, I want to talk about what is eugenics, because you need to understand this as we prepare to speak with Obianuju Ekeocha in just a moment here. She'll be talking about the eugenics that's experienced and being targeted there in Africa. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Trending with Timmerie. Thanks for joining me. Be sure to connect on social media, especially Instagram. Just head over to relevantradio.com/trending, especially if you want to share today's episode. It'll be available at the end of the day, and you can forward it on to a friend or family member. You see, we need to understand what eugenics is. A great example of eugenics was actually in one of the most recent Marvel films, The Avengers. I'm forgetting which of the Avengers films it was. I know Thanos was the main character. I know someone's going to buzz me right now and tell me which of the Avengers movies that was. But here's the reality. It was a great example of eugenics, and it's interesting because in that case, eugenics was actually looked at as the enemy. Now, you see, this is what eugenics is. It's essentially the arranging of reproduction to produce a desired outcome, to quote-unquote improve the human race. Now, it might not just have to do with reproduction. It might even have to do with outright killing people who are already born. But you see, it's done utilizing lab coats and in quote-unquote sterile situations to try and make it look less barbaric than Nazi Germany. Because you see, the Nazis were eugenicists. You see, essentially eugenics is what we see through population control. It's selective abortion and contraception use. And the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, was a eugenicist and even had links to Hitler and the Nazis. We'll be right back here on Trending with Timmerie.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Solidarity Health Share is simple to help pay for affordable, quality health care. They enable the community to share in each other's eligible medical expenses. You choose the doctor that you want to see. Even integrative and alternative medical treatments are eligible. Solidarity Health Share helps pay for NAPRO technology and costs associated with natural family planning. Solidarity Health Share is dedicated to both faith and your health care. Information is available at solidarityhealthshare.org. If you'd like to join the conversation, go ahead and reach out on social media. We'd love to hear from you. Just head over to relevantradio.com/trending to get connected. Share your thoughts on today's show. Joining me is Obianuju Ekeocha from Pro-Life Africa and the author of Target Africa. Recently on Twitter, she's called Planned Parenthood out in the midst of conversation surrounding racism, not only as protests are rather radical here in the United States, but also there in the UK where you live now. Obianuju, is that correct?
Yes. Timmerie, thanks for having me on your show. This is quite a pleasure for me. I am Nigerian, as maybe some of your relevant radio listeners may know, but I live in the United Kingdom and have done so for the last 14 years. So we are having some protests here as well in parts of the country.
Wow. It's very fascinating times to kind of see how people are reacting to just everything over the last couple months, from coronavirus to the tragic death of George Floyd. And now you called Planned Parenthood out, as Planned Parenthood has been posting and commenting about how devastated they are and their outrage over the violence against Black lives, yet not often. We spoke about this earlier in the show about their eugenics roots and their targeting of the African community along with other communities that they consider impoverished that they would like to blot out. But why did you call out Planned Parenthood? And can you tell us stories of how Planned Parenthood Federation of America has targeted the African people with population control via abortion and contraception?
Right. So, actually, I had to comment on that day when I saw that tweet by Planned Parenthood, something about the protest, something about George Floyd's most unfortunate death, and they're out there being Planned Parenthood, showing their outrage, and I said to them, listen, you have to sit this one out, because I'm sure most of your listeners again may know the roots of Planned Parenthood, deeply rooted in eugenics. The founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, she was a card-carrying eugenicists, a lot of them at that time who were the so-called quote-unquote feminists and those who were moving for reproductive rights in the 1920s and 30s. Many of them were eugenicists. So their organization is founded on this. They have, in the United States, a lot of people who live in the U.S. will also know that Planned Parenthood facilities are located very close to minority communities. But apart from that, as you asked me, I have a lot of interest in the international pro-life work. So Planned Parenthood Federation of America, PPFA, as you know it, is actually a child, I'd say the oldest and the richest child of the IPPF, International Planned Parenthood Federation. And I've had so many dealings with them and so much brush with them, because they, in this incarnation as IPPF, then go out to other countries, especially poorer countries, and bring death to the populations there. They are doing population control. They are aborting babies. So that was why I had to comment, because not only do I know how PPFA has devastated and destroyed communities, minority and poor communities in the United States, we see them in other parts of the world where they are busy doing their terrible work of eugenics.
That's Obianuju Ekeocha. She is, again, the author of Target Africa, and she's sharing her experience of how Planned Parenthood has targeted the African people. Obianuju, can you speak to maybe some specific stories that you're aware of how Africa has targeted the community and specific women and what they've gone through there in Africa as a result?
Yeah, so recently, in fact, it wasn't 2 days ago that this news hit the local papers in Ghana that PPAG, which is the Planned Parenthood Association of Ghana, again, that name Planned Parenthood, if anyone wonders, it's really the same organization. They just wore another coat and went into Ghana. They were saying that in the last 3 years, they have aborted about 2,000 babies. First of all, I tell people, African countries are pro-life. African countries do not have legal abortion. So it starts with the question, how is it that Planned Parenthood Association of Ghana is able to admit publicly that they have aborted over 2,000 babies in the last 3 years, and nobody is asking them the very basic question that is supposed to be asked, which is it legal? So they are there. What they're saying is they're doing illegal abortions. We also have them in Nigeria, where they are doing a lot of that work. They are aborting babies illegally, but not just that. They are able to get money from Western nations and Western governments that give them money. So Canadian government has given lots of money to reproductive rights and these sexual rights groups, including, and of course, Planned Parenthood being the first of those kinds of organizations. They get these millions of dollars from the West, then they come into African countries. They're doing legal abortions, but in addition to that, and more dangerously than that, they are very actively lobbying African parliaments to have African nations legalize abortion. And this work has gone on, let's say, for the last decade very actively. And that is part of my major campaign against them, is to try to stop them, because no matter what they answer, whether they answer Planned Parenthood Federation or Planned Parenthood Association of Ghana or Planned Parenthood Nigeria, they are all Planned Parenthood, and it is a Western organization acting like they are part of our, African institutions, and they're not.
And to provide some context, this is just abortions being done in Ghana. So they're saying 2,000 in 3 years. That's about 3 abortions a day. And remember, Ghana, in comparison to the United States, is, smaller than the size of Texas. That's a lot of illegal abortions for a place where abortion is not legal. And so it's quite shocking to see this. Can you tell us about these abortions? Are these predominantly women who they claim are, kind of getting that exception for rape, for it wouldn't be an abortion, yet for some reason people continue to call a procedure to remove a child after miscarriage and abortion, which is not abortion. But in cases of incest.
No, that doesn't. Right. The 2000 is not it. It's not. Okay. It's not like miscarried babies. These are real abortions. They are actually, I would think, they're surgical abortions. So I believe that the 2,000 number they're giving, it's a modest figure. I think they're doing a lot more than that, you see, Timmerie, because we now have medical abortions where a lot of Western organizations, sexual rights groups, are coming with misoprostol, and they're coming with the, DIY abortions and the easy ones where they are slipping pills, into the hands of women, and they are, getting higher numbers, and they're able to get their funding. It just kind of goes all around. And at the United Nations, when we go for our meeting once a year, we get to see them. They are talking proudly about the work that they are doing. Now, you asked about the women who they're saying, okay, these are the people we're helping, quote unquote, helping. Actually, what they are doing is so dangerous to African communities, because in more cases than not, these are women who are probably exploited. So situations where someone is in a school and a lecturer decides to sleep with you for marks. We see these kind of things in Africa. People who are serving within households and the boss wants to sleep with. So these are situations that what Planned Parenthood or any organization needs to do is not to go in and look for the product of these exploitations. It's to go right at the root and take out exactly what women are suffering from in some parts of African society. So they are kind of covering up the real crime, which is the crime against women, the violation of women, the exploitation of women, underage girls. No, we don't want you to delete the evidence of what has happened. We need right now for justice to be done. And justice doesn't mean killing the child. Justice means going all the way to the root to find out exactly who are those who are exploiting women within African communities. And Planned Parenthood is making it much easier for them as they are doing their work. And it comes all the way round to Western taxpayers, because most people in the United States may not even understand that somehow, in some cases, their tax money may be going to this kind of horrible mission that these organizations are undertaking in African nations.
And in a little bit, I want to dive a little bit more into the gender inequality that people point to taking place in Africa. And they try to use abortion as like the answer to it all. And you're saying it's not. Well, unpack that a little bit more, because I'm shocked. Even a lot of Catholics, even pro-life people think, well, maybe contraception is the solution for places in Africa where we're seeing this abuse of women. So we'll dive into that in a bit. But you touched on something really important. And that is the fact that even our American dollars, taxpayer dollars, have gone to this. And this has been one of the great things about this current administration, is that we have pulled our funds in some instances, such as we no longer fund the United Nations Population Fund currently, which helps to target, unfortunately, abortion for women in Africa and other areas as well around the world. I want to dive a little bit more in a second into the elements of who is actually having these abortions. Are they just sexual abuse victims, or are Planned Parenthood and other organizations creating a demand for abortion outside of sexual abuse? We'll be right back on Trending with Timmerie.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
I'm back with Obianuju Ekeocha. She's from Pro-Life Africa and the author of Target Africa. And we're talking about the really targeting of Planned Parenthood and population organizations and the eugenics movement that's targeting the African people. Now, Obianuju, one comment I'm always shocked to hear, and we kind of started to touch on this just a moment ago, is that unfortunately, many Western, pro-life, and even Catholic individuals, Christian individuals, ignorantly think that contraception is a good option for your culture because they perceive it as a male-dominant culture that's sexually aggressive toward women. And so in the name of gender inequality, people who are pro-life are advocating for contraception and at times even abortion. Is this helping the culture? And in terms of the abortion numbers that we see in Africa, are most of these women who are seeking abortions going for elective purposes or because they're victims of some form of sexual abuse?
Yeah, so actually this question has a lot of parts to it. Let me dive into the contraception question about people who may mean well, and they think they mean well, and they're thinking, well, what's wrong with just bringing contraception? There's actually a lot of things wrong with bringing contraception, to an African village, and you start sharing it like it's vitamins or something that would help women. I tell people it will not help. I haven't seen one single person in an African country, or in all my experience going from one African country to another, where somebody said to me, I took these contraceptives and my life changed for the better. What will really change the life of a woman all around 360 degrees of this woman's life is education, empowerment through education. And on many occasions, I have spoken out at different forums about this, and the Western lobby, the Western groups, the Western organizations, they keep turning a blind eye to it. So it's almost like they don't really care if African women are going to school. But as long as we give you contraception, okay, bye, get on well. It doesn't change anybody's life. You give someone contraceptives today, you come back 2 years from today, if nothing happens around this woman, if she's not in school, if she is not getting the right training that she needs to be independent or to be able to stand on her 2 feet or to be able to help herself and her family, then you haven't really changed anything. What you've done is you've drugged up our population, which is not an unusual thing that has happened at several times and in different places in many parts of Africa. So that is the one thing. Education, anyone who really genuinely cares, the Catholics who think contraception will help, actually, what will help is putting that focus on education, that a girl is able to go to school. It gives her so much more confidence. It can take her out of poverty. It puts her away, makes her out of reach for child marriage, for example, because parents will not willingly, in most cases, they will not willingly go and take their daughters out of school in order to get them married off. When child marriage happens is usually where a girl has no access or no help in terms of education, and she's just sitting there. Perhaps her uneducated parents might just say, okay, you go and marry somebody, and that becomes child marriage. And then Planned Parenthood then comes in at that point, after the fact, when the girl's life is already destined for poverty, because a girl who doesn't get educated in the right way, get the basic education, is destined already for poverty. We've seen this. It's like a vicious cycle. So they come in and they start offering contraception and abortion. You know, there's so much inequality here. There's inequality because the inequality starts at the point of education. If the number of girls who are out of school is so, there's such a huge gap. There's actually a real gap between the boys who are enrolled in school and the girls who are enrolled in school. If the international community would only look that closely at that point and correct it, you make sure that the girls are going to school at the same time they're learning to read and write, they are getting the basic education, they're getting the basic life skills, then you've already set them up. Then you don't have to be telling them, oh, come take contraception, because now they know how to read, the insert, and they can tell that there is something like this that could give them a lot of side effects. Speaking of side effects, we've also handled a lot of that in different African countries where Western organizations come in, dump their contraceptives that then cause a lot of health problems because women are taking these contraceptives and then they're having side effects of which they don't have access to doctors to go to. So that then becomes yet another issue that is being created across different African rural regions. And nobody is talking about that. So Planned Parenthood, Marie Stopes International, all these sexual rights groups, they are doing us a huge disservice. And those people who think it's like a goodwill to help them or support them or, let's be open-minded about it, that actually also doing us a disservice in thinking that way. We need our dignity, and our dignity begins from the point where boys and girls equally are getting trained with the basic knowledge that people need in life, things that you take for granted in the West, that everyone gets an education until they're at least 16 years old. Most people in many parts of Africa don't have that. They don't have that. There's more than 90 million children who are out of school, who should be getting educated, who are not getting it. So we need people to talk more about that.
That's Obianuju Ekeocha, author of Target Africa. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. If you'd like to weigh in on the conversation, just head over to relevantradio.com/trending and connect on social media. Obianuju, you just summarized so well the confusion people have. They believe that in the name of gender inequality, that by providing contraception and abortion, that's what helps women, but it contributes to abuse. It covers things up. And they'll also try to claim that, well, okay, you want education, we'll give comprehensive sex education. So again, that you're quote unquote sexually protected. But in reality, you pointed out so beautifully and eloquently that education is needed to lift women out of poverty, to lift them out of sexual abuse and child marriage so that they can support themselves in cultures and situations so that they can leave what could be a potentially abusive situation or leave a currently existing abusive situation rather than just being given a Band-Aid that doesn't even help protect the wound of what's going on.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's we've seen a lot of that, and we have spoken out against it, and many times I have gone to Western countries, I've begged people in power to please stop funding organizations like Planned Parenthood or International Planned Parenthood Federation, however they exist, because they are only perpetuating our problem, and they are putting a lot of people into this vicious cycle of sexual exploitation and poverty. And they're just offering, the death of our children as a solution. It's like someone coming into a burning house and saying to you, how this fire would be put out is if you kill your child, then you're able to run out of this house. No, we need something a lot more human than that, and something with a lot more consideration for entire communities. And we are pro-life anyway. We love family, we love children as societies, and so they're not helping us in order for us to be able to live within our rightful cultural views and values with regards to human dignity and human dignity and the sanctity of human life at every point and stage of development.
That's Obianuju Ekeocha here on Trending with Timmerie. Obianuju, one of the comments you often make is that the culture in Africa is actually naturally pro-life. So we may have this gender inequality, but there's value to new life. There's a celebration of life. So my question for you is, how has Western civilization's influence and really intrusion into your culture caused maybe a pro-abortion mindset in a culture that's naturally pro-life?
Yeah, they're getting access to our children through the United Nations. Now, this is actually something that has become quite problematic because the sexual rights groups, Planned Parenthood, International Planned Parenthood Federation, Marie Stopes International, Dick Katie International, all these organizations are going to the United Nations and proposing this so-called comprehensive sexuality education, which you alluded to earlier. It sounds like a wonderful thing, but it really isn't. They want it to become the part of a universal curriculum whereby children in every country, it doesn't matter, even pro-life countries, will then have it, have made it necessary and compulsory for them to take the CSE, the Comprehensive Sexuality Education, which then has as part of it, as we have studied it and we've gone right deep into it, and I write about it in Target Africa anyway, it all has part of it that abortion is all right, abortion is a woman's right, abortion can be made safe if it's legal, sexuality doesn't come with responsibility, your sexual rights, your sexual pleasure, all of this. So these organizations are using almost a marketing campaign, targeting the younger generations in Africa. And yes, and then in that way, to answer your question, is bringing about, in almost an organic way, a pro-abortion mentality. Or a mentality which then takes it that it's no big deal if one aborts a baby in a difficult situation, for example, which is not the way our parents and our grandparents taught us. But then the World Health Organization and the United Nations is coming with a whole new plan of getting an entire generation of African kids through policy.
Wow.
And our countries are very friendly to these international organizations. So African health ministries will open their doors quite easily, for example, to World Health Organization. But then what they don't realize is that World Health is coming with policy that has been proposed by sexual rights groups in the West.
Obianuju, that makes me ask one question. Wow, we're seeing a turning of a generation in terms of ideas surrounding sexuality. Do you see that most of the younger generation now is more pro-abortion?
No. I still believe that our culture is so firmly rooted within who we are, but then the struggle is real. So in African countries, there's a poll that I always talk about and I have written about as well, where most Africans, even though we know what abortion is, but people still know it's wrong. So even when they're polled, they will tell you, most of the people within a particular population, within African society, will tell you it's wrong, it's killing. So they're working hard, but God is helping us to keep our faith and our culture alive.
That is Obianuju Ekeocha. She's the author of Target Africa. We'll link to her on social media if you just head over to relevantradio.com/trending. Africa is still pro-life, and we have to continue to battle to protect the pro-life positions of many cultures across the world.